Education NG Motshekga to just tease out one or two, maybe three issues that we believe perhaps the nation might need some explanations on, starting with the fact that it's down. We're down by 5.1%, but you're arguing that we shouldn't focus really on the percentage drop, but rather on the fact that there are more children have matriculated this time around. More of them have bachelor passes than has ever been the case before, and that more of our children have actually passed maths and science. Why is that important and not so much the percentage drop?
No, basically I think it's important to look at human beings, how many learners will pass. So if we say 80%, if it's 80% of 100 learners, or we say 50% of 1,000,000 learners, that's a big difference. So the mere fact that we added more learners on our system, we did expect that with more learners, obviously there's more pressure, there are more learners coming through. But in particular, for the past 2 years, from last year and this year, we've kept on encouraging province to say these learners that we are likely to ask not to come back to school because they're overaged, they have failed more than the required number. So let's give them a second chance, give them extra support, so which means provinces themselves were overstretched to support learners who had failed, who were not going to be writing matric, to write matric and prepare those that are going to write matric. So that in itself, it's what we should celebrate, because for me, what excites me, because it was a huge risk. These are learners, almost more than 60,000 of them who will not have written matric this year. More than 20,000 of them have passed. Some even got distinctions. And for me, that's cause to celebrate. Learners who would have written without progress learners would have passed in any case. So if we had not brought in progress learners, we would not be talking about a drop, because we would have, Western Cape, for instance, would have had 88% learners if they had not added those that had not passed. So actually those that were going to write, the percentage is fine with them. It's just that we took a chance with those that to say, let's see what comes out of it, because the likelihood is that we have to ask them not to come back.
Well, there's a narrative or argument that you have in fact, as one academic put it, pushed through some of the students, hence you have achieved the higher numbers of students who have passed, and those who have gotten bachelor's passes, and those who have passed maths and science.
And that's what we should celebrate. And for me, the 2015 results, as I said, it was not an easy year.
Well, it's almost like they are arguing that you have artificially sort of manipulated this.
No, why would I? Because it's a risk. And provinces were very unhappy when we asked them to say, put more learners to write exams and give them support. It's more risky, it's more burdensome, it's more challenging to really have more learners in the system rather than have less. If we have less, I'm sure we'll be at 90%. But because we have more work, we have more responsibility, we have more risks, and we really, but what is good, we have more learners going through.
Now, the Eastern Cape, KZN, and Limpopo, are responsible for the big drop, the biggest drop. To quote you, what you said earlier on, they have done dismally, badly, dragging the entire country down, as it were. The question is, what are you going to do?
Now, we will continue to work with the provinces. We also have to bear in mind that they are the biggest provinces. They're hard to work in provinces. KZN alone equals to 5 provinces. They have 160,000 learners. You take Western Cape, Northern Cape, they're 10,000. Western Cape, they're 30,000. Free State had 30,000. So they had to deal with almost 5 times what other people had to deal with. But their budgets also allow them, because they also have 5 times the size of the budget. So we'll have to work closer with, and it's just a sign of that where there's instability, you always have problems. In Limpopo, Malamulele had serious impact, but it's also a very unstable province. They've been having, they've never had a head of department ever since 2011. Eastern Cape, they've never had a head of department since 2011. So again, instability in the administration and instability in communities contribute a lot also to the performance of the learners. So what we need to do is to work close with communities to say they have to protect learning spaces as sacred spaces and not disrupt schooling. That's the first thing. But also work with systemic problems in those provinces, because the 3 provinces have major systemic problems.
But that's exactly what I wanted to get into, because if you're saying the resources that KZN, as one example, has actually speak to the numbers of students, the numbers of teachers and every schools and everything else that they have, then what then is the problem if the resources are, speaking to the numbers of people that they have?
The resources to the department, not to the committee. I mean, KZN up to now, it's very hard to work in a province. We still have learners working long distances because the province can't even afford to give them buses. We have a higher percentage of poverty rates, but there are also, where we have to admit, working with the MEC, there's still room for them to improve. They can still do better. The same with the Eastern Cape. It's a hard to work in province. It's very rural. It's dispersed. Kids travel long distances to school. If you have to compare Gauteng and Western Cape, except for traffic, children in Gauteng don't have to be walking 5 distance. It's traffic which delays them. But in the Eastern Cape, we find kids that still have to walk for 5 km to school and back.
But we can't sit and say, well, these are serial offenders. Yes, we understand the enormity of the challenges that they are facing. The question is whether we are going to be able anytime soon to deal with those problems that we know exist.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Far from it. And that's why we are picking them out to say these are the 3 provinces that need everybody's support. They have themselves to pull themselves together. They have to make sure that the stability. They have to, and that's why I'm citing other things which they have to do. They have to appoint a permanent heads of department. They have to stabilize the systems, and that depends on the provinces. But as national, we're committing ourselves to make sure that we give them more support. We pay more attention to Eastern Cape and Limpopo. We've been intervening, and we'll continue to support them. We'll continue to intervene. Even when we get external support, for instance, the NECT, the Sizwe outfit, we send them both in Limpopo and the Eastern Cape. There's a group that is working in KZ and the KZ grouping to also. So even help that we get from our partners, we deploy them to these provinces because we know that they need more support.
Who does the buck stop with? In other words, where do we need to really make some huge and radical changes?
It's all over. That's why we say education is a societal issue. It starts with parents. Parents have to support their kids. They have to show interest in their kids' education. Teachers have to be in class on time teaching. Provinces have to make sure that there are resources. National has to make sure. So it's everybody. So education is everybody's business. So the buck stops with all of us, including the learners themselves. And that's what is complicated about education, that it's everybody's business to make sure that things happen. Even if the government can pour resources, if schools won't pull together, that's a problem. If schools try hard and the province is not supporting them, it still won't work. So it's all of us doing our part in terms of what our responsibility and our mandate is. So the buck stops with all of us, from learner to myself as minister.
Well, let's take the teachers. What are the teachers not doing that which could help if they were to do?
No, there's quite a number of things that teachers can do better. It's really not a secret that we still find that our teachers are not in class on time teaching. We have 3 reports from independent sources that not only specifically speak about Eastern Cape, Limpopo, and KZN, which says, you have your Stellenbosch report, you have a Nidu report, you have a Chisholm report, which says in Black African schools, in some classes, there's less than 50% of teaching taking place. So there's still issues just of being in class on time teaching. But there are also issues of discipline amongst the learners in terms of dysfunctionalities of communities. But if you say about teachers, just a basic thing of being in class on time and teaching.
So if we were to be impolite about it, our teachers are actually failing our nation.
No, all of us. I really would be very disingenuous if I can only put it on the of teachers.
Well, let's talk about that which you are not doing as the education department.
As government.
As government.
What we are still failing to do is to support, in terms of resources, to be able to mobilize enough resources to make life easier for provinces. As I'm saying in KZN, there are still kids who travel 10 kilos to schools. And why? There's no money for scholar transport. It's not because we're not aware. There's nothing we can do. We don't have money to do it. There are schools for instance, in KZN, which are completely dilapidated. What is the problem? We don't have resources. And sometimes the capacity even of service providers. So it will be very, as I say, disingenuous of me to say it's teachers alone.
But that's why I say... Is it the lack of resources or the resources that we have perhaps not being deployed as ideally?
In some instances, it's lack of resources. I mean, for instance, KZN they had to use money for infrastructure to pay salaries, because with all the increase in terms of salary bills, they were not coping. So it's just a myriad of problems. That's why I say it would be unfair to blame teachers alone. It would be sometimes dishonest to say government doesn't care. It's just sometimes it's circumstances beyond their control. But what I think what we have to admit is that our children don't need excuses. It's their time. We have to do what it takes to make them succeed equally like kids from other provinces, and that's the commitment we give.
Well, lastly, but not least, Minister, the technical report seems to suggest that in the areas where there's been unrest or protests and so on, there hasn't, like, students there haven't performed perhaps as well as they could have.
It's actually a very sad thing. That's why I say really education is a societal issue. If you're going to have a disruption like we had in Malamulele, where people ban school books that we have delivered, they ban computers, they ban classes, so children have to learn under trees without books. It's a huge setback, not only in terms of time. Education is time bound. If you lose time, you actually have lost in many instances. So if you lose time, let alone lose resources which we can't replace, it's a disaster. And now we really have a very sad tendency, and I don't know why people are doing it, of using kids as pawns. You want electricity, you put kids forward. You want a road, it's kids. I just think it's very cruel and unfair on kids who really have nothing to do with our difficulties and our differences as parents. And it shows from the results. Vembe, for instance, would not have gone in the 70s had it not of Malamulele problems. So instead of supporting these learners, they had to then go and run around Malamulele and sort out things. In the Eastern Cape, there's constant difficulties in terms of also restlessness within the system itself for teachers on strike.
Like the northern areas in Port Elizabeth.
Exactly. There are constant problems. In KZN, there's just a simmering instability in the province, which makes it very difficult and unfairly steals from children what is rightfully theirs, their education. So as I say, in addition to some of the systemic problems, but also our societies, our communities are not doing their part. And I can tell you, for instance, in communities, poor as they are, even poor communities, will be in every park tomorrow. For the past 5 years, every park, because there's a community thing of really working together. Schools don't perform less than 70 to 80%. It's a very poor community. It's an informal settlement, but there is respect for education in that community. It works well. And really, it's a humble appeal to parents to say it's cruel to deny a child education, especially poor children, because half the time that's the only thing that is likely to help them out of poverty and give them a better life. And if you rob them of that, I think it's one of the biggest crimes you can do against children.
It's cruel to deny a child education. Well, that's where we are going to leave it with the Minister of Basic Education, Minister NG Motshekga. A little later on, we hope to speak to teacher representatives as well as educationists just to get their take on the results that came out this evening. For now, it's back to you in the studio, Peter.